On today's episode of the Locked On Texan podcast, what would have to happen for all Texan fans across the nation to say, you know what? They don't have a clue what the hell they doing. Yeah. Worst case draft scenario. And we also get 713 Ruben in the house to talk draft and Houston Texans.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily podcast on the Houston Texans. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Battle Red Nation, welcome to today's episode of the Locked On Texan podcast. It's your boys, John Hickman, alongside the man with the big hat and even bigger smile, Brian Big Sars Bearfield. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day and being a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On today's show, we'll look at how does Ruben feel? 713 Ruben feel? You know, what is his dream scenario? How does he feel about CJ Stroud in a press conference? And we open up today's show between Sarge and myself to look at, hey, man, what's the worst case scenario? Like, honestly, if they draft a cornerback at 25 or if they mortgage too many of their picks, we'll talk about all of that on today's show. Sarge.
Greetings and salutations, John Hickman.
I'm excited about today's show. We were kind of giving you guys a double hitter, right? So The other day on Twitter, I said, man, listen, what would a complete disaster of a draft look like for the Texans? My man E-Mac said, this is for you, Sarge, them waiting until the 7th round to draft a receiver at Big Sarge, shaking my head. My man LJ Texan said, having to trade all of our picks only to end up with one starter on offense. Swarm Merchant, not getting weapons and protection, overpaying to move up, or trading capital for a player that doesn't really fit the vision they seem to be laying out. And I want to respond to those, Sarge. Honestly, I agree with all of them. I think if Houston does flirt with the idea of trading up, this needs to be a move that doesn't necessarily take away too much from them either on the back end of this year's draft or too much from 2026. With that being said, they sit at 25. I don't think they should move up higher than 20 or 19. But overall, Sarge, they cannot leave this draft without an anchor somewhere on that offensive line, whether it be inside at guard or tackle, and real weapons for CJ Stroud to get the ball to on the outside.
Yeah. John, you're asking for a lot. And let me start off by saying, let me start off by saying this. That question, I feel, is a loaded question. You still have it up?
Yes.
Can you read that question one more time?
What would a complete disaster of a draft look like for the Texans?
Now, John, you know when you ask that question on an open forum like X or, the app formerly known as Twitter, right? You know the amount of responses you're going to get. And the reason why I say that, and there's going to be other people, that ain't popped up in a lot of Texans fans' algorithm just yet, but it will. They're never satisfied, John. It does not matter. You know what? On Monday, Will Anderson Jr. was asked, did he go back and look at some of the fodder and the chatter that was said about him pre-draft and something? He said, I didn't go back and look at none of that, but I do remember a lot of things that was said. John, there was a lot of people who didn't want the Houston Texans to draft. That they didn't want them to draft Will Anderson Jr.
Yeah, they wanted. Some people wanted Tyree Wilson.
Right? Was that
who
you?
Ain't done nothing in the league, by the way.
That wasn't you though.
No.
Oh, gotcha. Some people.
I'm actually one of the only person to say the Houston Texans will leave the 2023 draft for both CJ Stroud and Will Anderson.
And you know what, John? I know you said that. I just want to make sure that people heard it again. But John, there's some people who weren't satisfied with the Houston Texans taking CJ Stroud because they said, oh, here we go with another Ohio State quarterback who's not going to pan out to anything, right? Who's not going to be anything, right? There's people who said Nico Collins will never be anything. Derek Stingley Jr., he's too injury prone, and why did we waste a pick on him? So, John, there's people that's never going to be satisfied. So there's always going to be people out there who say this draft is this draft is that. And this year, if they don't trade up and draft some of that talent, I might be on board with them and saying, So what you drafted somebody that you're going to start in year 3? You drafted somebody that you're going to use as a developmental player? Did Frank Ross come into the room and say, "Hey guys, don't forget to give me some guys who can play special teams. Don't forget to give me some guys who
don't forget about me."
Yeah, don't forget about me. And I mean, John, let's just be honest. I'm gonna be honest with you. I feel like one of the worst things that the Houston Texans can do, but the thing that they need to do, they're gonna have to draft a kicker. So,
No, I agree. And
they're gonna John, real quick, I was just saying they're gonna have to draft a kicker. And the sad part about it is they don't have a lot of draft picks in order to draft a kicker. And they also may have to use some of those draft picks to jump up in the draft in order to get some of the best available talent. So it's always going to be worst case scenario for a lot of fans. The only thing that I say is the worst case scenario is if they look at best player available, and we've said this before, and they say, "Hey man, this linebacker really looks good. We could make, probably get him on the field." And you take a linebacker before you take any defensive player taken before.
Thank you. Just let's keep it
offensive
real.
player,
Yes.
I'm saying to myself, I'll be sitting in the press box and I'll be saying, "Hey, I don't think that was a good pick."
No, listen, and that's where it boils down to. It has to be offense over defense, in my opinion. And I like Kenneth Grant a lot. I like the Nolan kid out of Ole Miss. I like him a lot. I like his game, the potential they're playing, with Houston at 25. But defense kept them in every game last year, except for Minnesota. The defense caused 5 interceptions on Detroit. They lost that game. The Green Bay game, they lost their game, right? New York, they lost their game. So it has to be the enhancement on the offensive side of the ball. And let's be real. Houston has not drafted good linemen since 2019.
Which was
Titus Howard. So, yeah, a disaster would be, and this is for my boy free agent Aaron, the disaster would be drafting an offensive lineman again, and that player just doesn't pan out. And you look at the long list of offensive linemen they brought in franchise history, of course, but over the last couple of seasons, that would be another stain on the franchise. Not drafting a tackle or a guard that is a day one impact player, because it seems like every other team in the NFL that needs one finds one.
Mr. Hickman, I have a question for you real quickly.
Yes, sir.
Who is the offensive lineman that the Houston Texans should trade up? You said they shouldn't go no higher than 20. They currently sit at 25. What if they have to jump up to 17? Who is that player that you would jump up to 17 to get? Or if they jump up to 20, because we're looking at the Kelvin Banks, we're looking at the Bookers out of Alabama, and then I mean at 25, yes, I mean even if they get to 20, they still may have a shot at Connerly. But John, like we're looking at by the time that it's time for them to pick, even if they jump up to 20, a lot of the talented offensive linemen will be gone. A lot of the talented wide receivers, day one starters, because that's all I'm looking at, John. All I'm looking at is Houston has to come out of this draft, no matter what, with at least one day one starter on offense.
Yeah. And a good thing about that is, honestly, if we look at what we've been told from both D'Amico and Nick Caserio putting dots together, they do feel confident about how their roster's put together right now.
Yeah.
D'Amico mentioned the draft board. Nick Caserio mentioned the draft board. It doesn't seem like they have a bunch of players, because it feels like the guys that they do have, there's an expectation that they'll be around at the pick where they are presumed to pick. And they're so confident in the depth that all it needs is 1 or 2 players to come in and be impactful players. I'll say all that to say, I better not see no linebacker at 25.
Hey, that's what I say. What about look? The only defensive player that I would say that the Houston Texans should draft if he's available is Travis Hunter.
And we know he ain't gonna be available.
Exactly.
When we come back, we got 713 Ruben in the house kicking it with the Locked On Texans podcast.
One more thing, John. But he can also play offense.
Travis Hunter?
Yep.
But we know Houston ain't picking in the top 3.
Let's ask Ruben about it.
All right. When we come back, Texans talk. Let's have some fun.
There's nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment feels huge. It's electric. The arena, and with Game Time, you can be part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Game Time makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. Listen, I was in the house on Sunday night when the Houston Rockets played their first playoff game since 2019 inside of the Toyota Center, and that thing was packed. It was packed. Yeah. I mean, it was electric. The field in there was amazing. Every seat was full, and I will say this. I believe that a lot of those fans probably did use the Game Time app in order to get those tickets last minute and get them at a really, really good price. So with the next set of playoff games coming up here at the Toyota Center, I definitely would download the Game Time app and use that. But you also have Kendrick Lamar coming to NRG. You have Beyonce coming to NRG later on. So make sure you use that Game Time app. We did. I have my tickets to see Beyonce. Thank you very much. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. With Game Time, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute deals, save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. The all-in pricing means no surprise fees at checkout. What you see is what you pay. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
H-Town! 713 Ruben in the house, Houston Sports. Man, listen, it's always important for us to kind of like talk to our family and friends. And Ruben is a family and friend.
Oh,
not only of the show, but mine personally. We talk, but enough of that sentimental stuff. Texans draft week. We're talking about the Houston Texans. The talk of the town is, what will they do at 25? Will they stay at 25? Do they trade up? Do they trade back? And so that's where we're going to start, Ruben. For you, what would be the dream scenario?
So the dream scenario for me is find a way to end up with Kelvin Banks, offensive tackle out of Texas. Now, when I was on the Bleacher Report creator mock draft, what I had did, Hickman, I had traded up from 25 to 23. I jumped the Minnesota Vikings, did a deal with the Green Bay Packers. Obviously, we swapped the first. We swapped third. So I gave them 79. They gave me 87, I believe. And all I gave them was a sixth. We got pick 23. I selected Kelvin Banks, and hey, the Minnesota Vikings, they traded out of the first round. So that was their target, in my opinion. And I could see that scenario happening on draft night. There are going to be some teams needing offensive line help. And with Kelvin Banks, a lot of people consider him to be a franchise left tackle or a really great guard. The Houston Texans kind of put themselves in a corner where they need to address the offensive line. And if they don't, get alignment at 25, John, there's going to be a lot of people saying that the Houston Texans got this wrong. However, I think Kelvin Banks is a dream scenario for me.
You know what? And guys, make sure that you check out Bleacher Report when my man holds it down, representing H-Town like he does and does so well. Knocked out the mock draft. So I think you can still go find it on the Bleacher Report app, right? So make sure you guys go check that out. But for you, Ruben, why Banks over Simmons, over Booker, over Connolly, and even over another need for Houston, Emeka Egbuka, who has caught passes from quarterback CJ Stroud?
When I think about Josh Simmons, the only thing that kind of worries me is the injury. because the injury that he suffered, has a winning record of, you are not the same after you have this injury. However, Josh Simmons is still very young, but it's a risk that you are going to have to take. And here's the thing, in my opinion, the Texans, they can't really take this risk because this draft is very important. They need to take advantage of these day one impact for rookies and take advantage of these rookie contracts, because in a couple of seasons, Will Anderson Jr. is going to be a top 5 defensive player. CJ Stroud is going to be the highest paid quarterback in the NFL. Take advantage of these day one impact for rookies. And with Kelvin Banks, you look at his tape at Texas, starter since he was a freshman, believe was a 5-star recruit. That is something that Nick Caserio loves to look at. And when you look at the Texans, left tackle is a need. There is no injury concern with Kelvin Banks here in Texas, man. That's what I would absolutely love. Josh Connolly, I wouldn't mind that whatsoever. Out of Oregon, getting a lot of love, but being viewed as a, early second round draft pick. However, I have no issue taking advantage of the 5th-year option. Someone like a Josh Connolly Jr. would intrigue me.
Good point.
Donovan Jackson has been getting a lot of love recently. Also, guard/tackle out of Georgia. He can play anywhere. I like the versatility with him. But for me, it's Kelvin Banks. And for a lot of Houston Texans fans, man, they've been wanting Kelvin Banks for a while.
You know what? And I kind of find it funny that all of a sudden Kelvin Banks, who was once considered the best left tackle coming out, Houston is actually in play to draft him. But based off of your conversation that we just had right now, you are O-line first.
That's me, man. I've seen this with Derek Carr. We saw it with number 4. And we saw it last year with CJ Stroud being the second most sacked quarterback in the NFL. You cannot have that again, Hickman. And what we saw on Super Bowl night, Patrick Mahomes running for his life and realizing that was the pressure that CJ faced all year. Give me offensive line in the first round. Give me offensive line heavy. I know it is not sexy, but the trenches need to be built.
You know what? And speaking of not being sexy, eventually Houston got to get a little sexy, right? You go big first, you kind of go a little bit smaller second, right? So when you look at the Houston Texans having a second round pick at 58, 2 third-round picks, they have to address the wide receiver position, right? That is a major position of need for Houston. You are not going to win with just Nico Collins and the uncertainty of everybody else in that room. So if you're going offensive line first and you're going Banks first, with your second pick, are you now shifting your eyes and your sight to wide receiver? And if so, who's the sexy name for you?
A sexy name for me will be Trey Harris. I absolutely love the work that he did with Jackson Dart and having him and Nico Collins and Christian Kirk. That does excite me. He's still learning the position and didn't play a full season, but had 1,000 yards and 5+ touchdowns. I think what Trey Harris could do here is immediately be a impactful player. That is a sexy pick. Now you might have to trade up for Trey Harris, but I wouldn't mind that whatsoever. 2 third-round picks. Nick Caserio has shown that if he wants his guy, he is going to get his guy. Wide receiver to me at 2 in the second round is awesome. Running back. Now, hey, Caleb Johnson out of Iowa. What are you doing? To me, he looks exactly like Joe Mixon. I mean, 6'1", 220 pounds, not viewed as a speed guy, but someone who has vision, someone who is elusive, has met with the Houston Texans. Would love that. But what about tight end, Hickman? What about Elijah Arroyo, Miami? Who's getting a lot of love and is being viewed as a project. Nick Caley, our new offensive coordinator. I love tight ends, but second round, Trey Harris. Give me that all day.
Okay, so we look at the second round. Now we're kind of doing a little fly-by night type of mock draft right now. But with those 2 thirds, you just mentioned Caleb Johnson, who I personally view. I know a lot of people love Scatterbo and the 2 running backs from Ohio State, but I feel like Caleb Johnson is the second best back in this draft. I think he's better than Amari Hampton. That's just my feeling. You also mentioned looking at Trey Harris, a guy that I like. And I also think Trey Harris is a player that is a solidified outside receiver. For Houston, what did they do in the offseason? Traded for Christian Kirk, right? We've talked to Jags insiders, and the consensus thought is you don't want him to play a lot of snaps outside. Braxton Berrios, you don't want him to play a lot of snaps outside. So I like the Trey Harris. We get down to the 2 thirds, dream scenario. Where does Houston draft a defensive player?
Okay, so I was just about to bring up Alfred Collins, defensive tackle out of Texas, who has met with the Houston Texans and right now is, being viewed as someone who is dominant against the run, but needs to refine his pass rushing tools. And hey, I think he could do that time and time again. We have seen that whenever DeMeco Ryans gets his hands on a player on the defensive side, they get better. And I think the only thing you are lacking at the defensive tackle area is youth. Alfred Collins in the third round. I would absolutely love that. And hey, if you want to say the need for the defense was help against the run, well, you got that in Alfred Collins.
When we come back, I want to ask you about the worst case scenario for the Houston Texans draft. And we also had an opportunity to hear from CJ Stroud Monday afternoon. So I want to get your thoughts on that as well. Did you know your Fire TV is also an Xbox? Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire Stick 4K devices. No console required, Just grab your paired controller, subscribe or sign in to your Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to play. Dive into hundreds of premium titles like EA Sports College Football 25, Call of Duty, Black Ops 6, two games that I really enjoyed this past year. As easily as you stream your favorite TV shows, it's gaming made simple, and it's all on your Fire TV. With 4K streaming, watch more than 1.5 million movies and TV episodes from your favorite subscribed services like Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus, Max, and more. You also can play high quality Xbox games at a fraction of the cost of a console cost. Already have a console? A Fire Stick 4K device is more affordable and easier to travel with, allowing you to take your or your kids' games wherever you plug in. And so, listen, man, sometime you're on a road trip, you finally get to the hotel, and it's easier to take out that 4K Fire Stick device than breaking out an entire game console. That's a lot of work.
Yes.
And you don't want to necessarily like bang it up on the road while you're going there or spill something on it or break it. So that's why it's convenient, man. I'm a gamer. I love to play games. And the Amazon Fire TV, TV like the Xbox, is really easy for me to just sit back, relax, and play some games without the hassle of carrying a big console. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices, including the Fire TV Stick 4K, second gen, Fire TV Stick 4K Max, first and second gen, and Fire TV Cube, third gen. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans podcast listeners, Texan Nation across the world. The draft is Thursday. Highly anticipated draft for the Houston Texans as Houston goes into year 3 under DeMeco Ryans and CJ Stroud, who we will get to. But my man, 713 Houston Sports, I call him brother. Y'all may know him as Ruben. You can find him on Bleacher Report, but right now you're finding him on Locked On Texans. And you gave me your dream scenario. You woke up happy after that dream. We can consider that what young boys call blank dream, right? You were happy if Houston went down that route. Now, what's a dream scenario that's terrible? A dream that you'll wake up with a headache and and hive sweating going on. What would be the worst thing Houston could do in this draft?
If I saw Omarion Hampton at 25, I might fall to my knees and, have a mini heart attack. Going RB in the first round, I don't think is the right move for the Houston Texans. But, I'm pretty sure 2 years down the line, we'll be saying, oh, my God, look how great Omarion is. But if you don't get any offensive line help in this draft, if you are reaching for players, like giving up too much draft capital in the future, like let's say Kelvin Banks is gone and they have to do a trade up and select Josh Simmons, and it's clear it's a panic move, then that will be the worst case scenario for me. But I do have some confidence, John, in Nick Caserio. I looked at, his recent history. think about the amount of players that have already got a second contract with the Houston Texans. Nico Collins, Derek Stingley, Jalen Petrie, Davis Mills, Brevin Jordan, Nick Caserio, man, he knows what he is doing, and we're not seeing these Texans go to somewhere else and immediately turn into Pro Bowl players or staying home. But worst case scenario, you don't find any O-line help. You go RB round one. How would you feel if they went tight end round one?
That's a good question, man. Thank you for passing it back. Honestly, I don't think Houston needs to address tight end early. And I
Okay.
can make a case that Houston doesn't need to address tight end at all in this draft. And this is kind of the opposite of what I said last year when they walked out of the 2024 draft without drafting a wide receiver. Now, they did get the Yankee twins as undrafted free agents, but I thought for Houston that was a huge sign of negligence to that group. And in the end, it hurt them, right? This is after they went out and traded for Stephon Diggs, but then voided the last 3 years of his contract, essentially making it a one and done type of rental. They didn't give themselves any insurance, and it backfired. In terms of the tight end, they just re-signed Irv Smith, Kay Stover, who will be going into his sophomore year, who has experience with CJ Stroud dating back to college. Brevin Jordan, who is the Swiss Army knife. I mean, I love watching him last year during training camp, had an opportunity to talk to him. And let me tell you guys something. He loves to be that version of himself, a guy that can do it all. And the name that a lot of people are tired of hearing, like if you're a Rockets fan, I'm sure you're tired of hearing about Fred VanVleet, the vet, but a lot of Texas fans are tired of hearing about Dalton Schultz. Guys, he was very mismanaged last year. And so now I look at the possibility, giving him the opportunity to prove whether or not in camp he can be different, fit into a system that maximizes his strengths instead of having him block George Karlaftis on the outside, which led to 3 sacks. So I'm okay if Houston doesn't come away in this draft with a tight end.
No, I'm right there with you. If it is a tight end, I would think, in the later rounds with, Kate Stover, I think everyone is kind of, well, me, myself personally, I'm thinking he eventually becomes a legit tight end 2, low end tight end 1 for you in the future. Like I said, taking advantage of these rookie contracts. And I think you could potentially have one with Kate Stover. But yeah, that would be, I would feel some type of way. I see an RB tight end in round 1.
I'm not mad at that, and again, that would be complete negligence. That would be a nightmare of a dream that you don't want to see if you're a Texas fan. Now to pivot over to CJ Stroud, one thing that he said Monday that stood out to me was the only job of the quarterback is to make everybody around him better. This will be year 3 for CJ Stroud, but this will be year 1 of CJ and Nick Caley, right? The Bobby Slowick and CJ Stroud marriage didn't last too long. But we know that, and he knows he needs to be better and get the most out of everybody else around him. What are you actually looking forward to from CJ Stroud this year before we even get to OTAs and training camp? What do you want to see from your quarterback?
Just seeing the way he carries himself. Now, he already carries himself so well. But as far as growing into that leadership role for the Houston Texans, I think he showed a little bit of that today, right? The quote, taking full ownership, running the show and discussing, the new offense under Nick Caley. That's what I wanted to hear. That's what I wanted to see last year with CJ Stroud. So now we get to see, was Bobby Slowick really holding back CJ? And this is something that I am excited to see. But as far as his poise, how he looked up, how he looked at the podium, and looked like we got a CJ Stroud that's locked in. And that's what I wanted to see. Because, yes, I feel like the arguments last year of he was on too many podcasts, he was being showed across the world, maybe that had a negative effect into his play in year 2. He even mentioned that himself. Seeing him like this, look locked in, I really do like it. Even D'Amico himself with a little mustache, man. Let's go.
Yeah, that was a little different. And I think last year CJ kind of mirrored the fans a little bit, right? After that playoff win against the Browns and even how they went out, the feeling was, oh, the Texans are here. We are the next best thing. And both the fans and CJ was everywhere talking crazy. Rightfully so. It was deserving. But then now you see the fans being much more logical. Now
Cautious.
You see CJ cautious, right? But now you also see CJ. We haven't heard from him. Monday was the first time we've seen and heard from CJ Stroud. I know you got to go. You got to knock out your Bleacher Report deal. And guys, please be sure to check that out. And if you can't watch it live right now, make sure that you check it out on Ruben's page and on the Bleacher Report app. For CJ Stroud, he mentioned that Laramie and Shaq Mason was his boys. They were his best friends. the move of the offseason was trading Laremy Tunsil. Do you agree with that? And does that influence why you believe Houston needs to go offensive line first?
At first I was really upset about the trade. I have a soft spot for Laremy Tunsil. When he got traded to the Houston Texans, that was my first ever video here on YouTube. So I have a love for Laremy Tunsil. And I've always said this, if one guy can destroy your culture in the locker room, did you have one to begin with? And I thought guys like Laremy Tunsil, as special as he was, you could take some of the antics because, when he goes against the Myles Garretts of the world, the Micah Parsons of the world, he is going to shut them down. I was feeling that way for a couple of weeks, and then, I just stopped crying over spilled milk. I bought into the notion that maybe a culture change, maybe competition is what this offensive line needs. And then, you saw the clip of CJ Stroud on the Ryan Clark podcast saying, oh, Laremy's a vet. He don't practice. So you're like, okay, maybe I see where that argument is coming from. I wish Laremy Tunsil the very best, but like I mentioned earlier, it feels like you kind of put yourself in a corner where you have to address the offensive line. Because if CJ Stroud has another season of being a top 5 most sacked quarterback in the NFL, you're not doing anything.
You're not doing nothing, but what you are doing is kicking it with the Locked On Texans podcast, and our listeners are kicking it with 713 Houston Sports. Let our listeners know where they can find all of your amazing work.
Yeah, I'm dropping daily Houston Texans content on 713 Houston Sports on YouTube, Monday, Wednesday, Friday on the Bleacher Report app, 6 to 6:30. And hey, if you guys need something to do on Thursday, we'll be having a watch party at Dave & Buster's. John Hickman will be there with me, and we'll be doing a little pre-draft show for you. Super excited. Thanks for having me on.
Y'all pull up. It's good to mix family. We make a bigger family, and then the bigger family just turn up at the Texans tailgate this season when we can all come together. Thank you, Ruben, for stopping by, man.
Thank you so much.
That was my man, 713 Ruben. Thank you for stopping by the show. Thank you guys for watching today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. Please be sure to subscribe, like, and comment on YouTube and wherever you listen to your pod.
And make sure you follow me on the app formerly known as Twitter at Big Star Sports with a Z at the end.
Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, Texas fans across the nation, peace.